Greetings loves, it is I, Tacticool Girlfriend. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everybody's doing well. Today I want to discuss a specter that is haunting GunTube. Specifically, that is the Elcan Specter. It is a Canadian flavored optic. It is very legendary for a lot of very good reasons. It's also maybe a little bit hyped. There may also be some not so great things about it. But regardless, I got one in my possession and I wanted to try it out and share my thoughts with you. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now before we dive in, just quick disclaimer for full transparency's sake. No, Raytheon did not extend their Rainbow Capitalism program to me. I actually have a Patreon supporter named Flightless Grebe who was very nice enough to loan me this Elcan Specter for me to try out and report my findings back to you. There are no strings attached. This was simply a very nice gesture and I really appreciate it. So thank you to Flightless Grebe for keeping this channel going and all my other Patreon supporters. And for folks who let me borrow cool things to try out. It really helps me generate more content and do things I normally couldn't afford to do. So, much appreciated to all of you. Now the Elcan Specter that I specifically tried out is the DR model. That is the dual roll model that uses both a 1x and 4x magnification. You simply can switch between these magnification settings. There's only two, there's nothing in between. The lens simply rotates on a lazy Susan basically with a flick of a switch. It's a really versatile optic. It's pretty powerful. It's got really good features. Let me get more into the specifics here, but it is very well regarded and very legendary for a lot of good reasons that I will also get into. As far as the dimensions go, this optic is about 6 inches long, which is a bit shorter than most LPVOs out there. In a world where rail space becomes more and more expensive and we're adding more and more things to our rifles, this can be a really important consideration for a lot of folks. So having that extra rail space can make a huge difference. Furthermore, it sits at a 1.5 inch axis height. As far as the weight goes, this thing comes in at 23 ounces, which is not terribly light. However, that also factors in the integrated mount that comes with it. And when you look at something like a Tacticool ACOG 4x, those come in at 15 ounces, but then you have to account for the mount. Furthermore, you also have the weird phenomenon with the eye relief on this thing, which I will get into later, which basically requires you to mount this thing as far back as you can get on the rails. So when you're shouldering the weapon, you probably are not going to feel that weight very much. It feels very balanced, center of gravity is really nice, and it really doesn't bother me when I shoot it. I've actually shot lighter LPVOs, and those bother me because of the weight distribution on the rails. So that is something to think about, but it's also not a huge detractor in my opinion. As far as the construction goes, it's housed in a solid piece of anodized aluminum. This basically makes it built like a tank. It's extremely rugged, it's extremely tough. These are very well renowned to just be pretty much bulletproof and bomb-proof. I haven't really ran a torture test on this thing, of course, because it's not my optic, but just rest assured that the reputation of these absolutely precedes them. While we're talking about the body, let's talk about a few things that we can add to it. First of all, on top, this thing does accept other optic mounts, so if you got something like an RMR that you want to use as a backup sight, you absolutely can. Speaking of which, it does have backup iron sights on top, which allow you to move them from side to side if you do mount another optic on there so that you can even use those as a redundancy. Furthermore, you can also screw in a kill flash on the very front. The Spectre is water resistant up to 2 hours at 66 feet. As far as the mount goes, it's a pretty dated one. It uses the arms mount, which is pretty old school tech at this point. This optic is absolutely stuck in the early 2000s. And yes, you can buy adjustable levers for your arms mount, but that's a whole upcharge, and the entire technology around this just isn't really the best compared to what's being offered now. I think that you could do a lot better, and for an optic that costs as much, I really wish that they included something better, but honestly, it's a very small gripe. Personally, when I was using these levers to attach it to my Picatinny rail, everything was solid. It didn't really have any problems keeping zero, so it's a very minor complaint. I think these mounts work, I just don't think they're ideal. This is an optic, so of course we really should talk about the glass. First of all, the 1x magnification setting is really nice. It's pretty close to true 1x. Yeah, it's maybe a little bit more than 1x, but most LPVOs out there are actually a little bit more distorted. This one, honestly, you can shoot with both eyes open and it doesn't bother me at all. Furthermore, you can flick the switch by holding down the lever, sliding it forward, and then you're at 4x. Basically, these are just two lenses that rotate on a Lazy Susan internally. It's a very, very simple but very elegant way of doing things, and therefore also more reliable. Now, they're up to Gen 4 on these Spectres. The previous generations from the 3 that I have here, the 2 and the 1, did have some reports of zero shift between magnification settings. A not insignificant amount either. They reportedly did fix that. I didn't notice any zero shift when I switched from 1 to 4. It seemed very consistent, so I think that the rumors are true, at least from what I've heard. This thing does maintain zero between both magnification settings. As far as the glass quality goes, it's extremely clear and even from edge to edge. Don't really notice any distortion, no chromatic aberration, and in terms of parallax, I didn't even really notice any parallax shift that was noteworthy. So overall, very, very good glass quality, and yeah, for an optic this expensive, you'd hope it would be good, but it sure does not disappoint. In terms of the field of view, it's almost as big as the ACOG, which is well renowned for its large field of view. At about 4 times magnification, you have about 34 feet at 100 meters. Compare that to the ACOG, which is 36 feet at 4 times magnification. At 1 times magnification on the Elcan, you also have 146 feet at 100 meters. Elcan advertises the eye relief to be at about 2.75 inches. Personally, I felt like I had to be a little bit closer, more like 2 inches flat. And regardless, I did have to mount this optic as far back on the rails as I pretty much could get it, but that worked. It was pretty reasonable, and for an optic of this style and grade, I don't think that's too bad, honestly. Now, compare that to something like the ACOG, where you need to get your nose on the charging handle to use it. This thing definitely is pretty forgiving in comparison. Now, the eye box itself is not terribly forgiving. I did notice that when I was shooting more dynamically, the shadows would creep up into the scope, and, slight deviations with my head would produce those. But regardless, if you are training with this optic a lot and you got a really good consistent cheek weld, it probably shouldn't be that much of an issue. It is just something to note. One thing I really want to highlight on this optic is light transmission, and that is to say that it is excellent. So much so that it is in fact probably one of the few magnified optics that I've ever found is even remotely usable, let alone actually really good for night vision use. Now herein lies the caveat. Because you are mounting this thing so far back normally on the rails, you probably aren't going to have any room to squeeze your night vision behind the optic for passive aiming. This means that if you are going to be using night vision, you might want to mount it a little bit further to accommodate for that, but then it's not going to be very optimal for daytime use, so you kind of run into a weird paradox here. Is it the end of the world if you have to do that? No, it's just not ideal, and it is a complaint that I have about it. Now, one other gripe I have with this thing under night vision is that it does have a fixed focal point. And this kind of becomes a problem because there is no diopter on it, and therefore when you're looking through this under night vision, you're going to have a set focal point through your night vision, and it's not going to line up when you look through the optic. Your focal point will then shift. This can be disorienting. It can even render everything useless, so that is definitely something to keep in mind. Basically, I really wish that this thing came with a diopter. I don't know why it doesn't. Perhaps it's because it is a variable magnification, and there's some weird optical science I don't understand there, but basically, yeah, there is definitely a challenge there in using night vision. Is it impossible? No, it's actually pretty good in most of my experience, but it's not ideal again. Moving on, let's talk about the reticle. These come in 2 different flavors. Basically, you have your 5.56 M855 from a 16-inch barrel, and a 7.62 version for 147 grain 7.62 NATO from a 20-inch barrel. You get a whole slew of bullet drop compensation points, range finding marks, and even area fire indicators for machine guns. Woohoo! As far as the brightness settings go, you basically have 2 kinds of brightness, as well as 5 settings within each. The first being a dot that gets up to burn your retinas out aim point bright. It's absolutely daylight bright, but you also can get some night vision settings there. Furthermore, you have the illuminate the entire reticle brightness settings, and again there's 5 of those. These are more well suited for low light shooting as well as for night vision. Now the dot itself is 1.5 MOA at the 4 times magnification and 6 times MOA at the 1 times magnification. Personally, when I'm shooting this thing during the day, I've found that it generally just doesn't need any illumination whatsoever. I actually can intuitively use those crosshairs to line up on target really easily and really quickly, even when I'm doing more CQB oriented stuff. No problem at all. Generally, those kind of settings are all more useful when it starts to actually get dark out. As far as the windage and elevation adjustments go, they're all on the outside. In fact, they're external to the point where it basically moves the entire optic. This is really nice because it means that they're just a bit more rugged. There's no internal mechanism moving the optic. There's nothing on the inside of the optic that can break. They're really rugged and well built. You have a elevation wheel that you can adjust by simply turning it. That elevation wheel is also lockable. Furthermore, you have a windage adjustment, which you simply just use a screwdriver to move. Now, a lot of people might be alarmed that these adjustments are external and exposed and that you might bump into them and mess things up. Again, the elevation adjustment is lockable. Just make sure you lock it when you're done zeroing. Further, the windage adjustment is really pretty much impossible to just bump into and mess it up, unless you're jamming a screwdriver into the side of this for no good reason. As far as the power source for the 3rd gen Specter goes, it utilizes a DL13N battery. This is an extremely bizarre and strange, unique battery that I don't think I've ever even heard of. Maybe it's a Canadian thing, I'm not Canadian, but regardless, the 4th gen appears to use a CR2032. That's a much more common battery, so if you are worried about that, definitely consider getting a 4th gen. Now, the battery life itself is advertised to run about 600 to 3,000 hours depending on your brightness settings. That's not too bad, it's not that great. Most red dots out there will outclass it, but hey, you also got an etched reticle if your battery dies, and furthermore, you've got backup iron sights if your reticle goes missing for some weird reason. Speaking of the backup iron sights, the sights on this optic are very rudimentary. Simply have a front sight post with a rear aperture. The sight radius is very short, shorter than a lot of compact handguns out there even. I would say it's a little bit less than 4 inches, which isn't going to land very tight groups at 100 yards, but again, these are backup iron sights. They're pretty much only useful out to 25 yards if you're lucky, but it is a really nice feature. It's definitely something that I don't see on many optics out there, so I do like having it there. And again, you can move them from side to side if you do mount another optic on top, which is also really smart. Now that we're done deep diving into the features, let me just give my final thoughts on this optic. The Elcan Specter DR sells for about $2,100 street price, which is not cheap. It's definitely nothing to scoff at. For that $2,100, you are getting very high quality glass. You're getting a very capable optic with an excellent reticle system. It's got plenty of great features and settings. Its bomb-proof design and even having the backup iron sights on it are really nice features, don't get me wrong. However, I do think that there are better options on the market these days. Even mounting an RMR on top of an ACOG would probably be a little bit more of an elegant solution. It comes in about the same price in total, and it is a little bit lighter, and there probably are other options out there. That said, even though this design is very dated, I do think it is also very inspiring. I think that switching from 1 to 4 times makes your platform incredibly capable, and you don't need a magnifier to do it. It's just an all-in-one, do-everything kind of optic, and that's really cool. Now, whether this optic is right for you or not, I really can't say. Personally, I don't think I would spend the money on it, but again, I do think it is a cool piece of optical history. It's certainly got some vibes to it, and maybe you're into that, so you do you. But regardless, I'm very thankful to Flightless Grebe again for letting me borrow this optic and allowing me to present it to you. Speaking of which, once again, huge shout out to everybody on Patreon who is keeping the channel afloat. This channel is completely viewer supported from viewers like you, so I really appreciate you all helping out. If you do want to help chip in, you can always go to patreon.com/tacticalgf. The biggest contributors are named at the end of the video. And that's a wrap. I really appreciate you all tuning in. Please be good to each other out there. And as always, please take care. Bye!